Okay, this started out to be just a demonstration of how not to have to stretch paper, and it works. We'll get back into the rest of this in a minute. But once the paper starts to, after you've worked on it, you can clip it onto clip it onto a board like so, and it'll stay nice and flat for you. You just lay the painting on there, clip it down with these large clips, and when you come back the next day, the next morning, it's nice and flat, no wrinkles, no bother. So typically I only use two methods, let's say. Wet into wet on the skies. On this little building down here, I'd use what I call dry into wet. And I do that by re-wetting the barn, say, and using a fairly dry brush to go in there, and I'll demonstrate that now. So typically we'll use the 1-inch brush for this. It's fairly dry. So what I'll do is I'll go back in here and re-wet this surface. Okay, we'll just paint around that window a little bit there. Now, here's the part that's you got to remember. You have to control the water in watercolor painting, or unfortunately the water will control you and your painting will suffer. So say we've got a wet surface, but we want to have a dry brush when we go in there. How in the heck are we going to do that? Well, that's the secret here. I'm going to show you. You do that with your nice little sponge and your paints. So, what you'll do, have a nice clean brush, come over here, and you dry it out pretty darn well in that sponge. Then you come and take this, in this particular, I'm using gold. Once you've got your paint on your brush, you come back over to your sponge and get the rest of the water. See, you notice I only got paint on one side here. Get some more so you can see it. I go back over to my sponge and try to get all the water I can out of this brush because I want it to be dry. Then I come in here. It is dry, you can see that. Then I come in here like this and paint, and you'll see it's controlled. The brush. Okay, now that's pretty boring. We don't want to have it all the same color, at least I don't. So I'd decide on, that's pretty warm. So perhaps I want a nice cool color. Maybe I'll use a little of this green. Come back over here and get the rest of that water out and come back in with some green like so. Oh, that looks pretty gaudy. I realize that. But it's a change. And maybe we need some more gold over here. So. Yeah. If it gets too dry, you can re-wet the paper. You don't have to. Now, one thing about watercolor painting you want to do is control your edges. Now, this edge down here is going to be pretty darn hard. See the little edges here? You don't want them to be hard usually, so you just come back in with a little water. Soften up that edge. Okay. And don't worry about if everything isn't just so. Watercolor is impressionistic. If you make a little mistake, well, it's okay. There's no guarantees. Now say on this eave here, you can re-wet that a little bit. Take some color you might like. Let's see. We'll take a nice little blue here. Put it there. Yeah, that's pretty boring too. We might want to throw a little red in there. Who's to say? That's pretty. Okay. Now, remember I was telling you about scraping? Now that's pretty boring. It's all the same. So perhaps we want to make some lines in it. Say it's shingles. Now if you go in there when it's real wet, you'll get a dark line, like so. You can see that's a dark line. If you wait a little bit and go back in, I don't know, perhaps we don't have time to do that right now, but if you go wait a little bit, you'll get a nice white line. Well, we haven't got a white line yet. But you can see that's interesting. It's not boring by any means. And that's dry into wet. Now there's other ways of doing it. You can go dry into dry. You can get a dry piece of paper like that. Say you got some. That's not really dry, but you can take a fairly dry brush and go into it like so. That's pretty rough. Rough is useful sometimes. And you can go wet into dry. You can take a dry piece of paper and just gob up a whole bunch of paint and paint wet into dry.